Hello, everybody. Welcome back, and welcome if you're new to my weekly cult situation report. I am Daniella Mestyanek Young, scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership, author of Uncultured, the critically acclaimed best-selling memoir that I wrote about growing up in the Children of God religious cult, and then going into the cult of the U.S. Army, where I was one of the first women in deliberate ground combat teams and got out as Captain Mestyanek. 2 deployments to Afghanistan. The situation report is what Army officers do every single Friday. You do a roll up of everything that happened that week and you send it up higher. So now that I am on YouTube and I need to make longer form videos, I am creating the weekly cult sit rep. Let's dive into it. If you like this, of course, please subscribe and like the video, subscribe to the channel. We'll be here all the time. Also going to be coming in with some cult documentary reviews on whatever schedule I want. So stay tuned for that. Of course, this week we had Kamala. Oh my goodness, I could not be more excited. I'm so excited that we are probably going to have a woman president. I'm also just so excited that somebody is out messiahing the cult messiah. It is just amazing. I really hope she chooses Pete Buttigieg or someone other than a straight white man. Because I think if you're going to go full revolution, just go full revolution. But it's really, really exciting, of course, to see what has been happening, everybody rallying around together about this. Want to talk a minute about deification. Well, first I want to talk about the word female, because this is dehumanizing language, the kind of language that we see in cults. So she is not going to be the first female president of the United States. She is going to be the first woman to be president of the United States. Just like we talk about the first man to be president of the United States, not the first male to be president of the United States. This is exceptionally dehumanizing language. Female is an adjective almost always. But the darn thing is that those human women insist on being nouns absolutely all of the time. Like I say to people in the military, if they are your men, we are your women. Oh, and by the way, fun fact, the use of female to describe humans only came into being in English to justify chattel slavery. So maybe let's not use it. I can tell you from the perspective of a soldier, when we hear that word often said in the same tone as witch with a B, we cringe. I cringe. It seems violent to me, that word. Why are you dehumanizing me to my face? It is freezing for a lot. That's on live. So it is dehumanizing language. This is something we see in cults all the time. Yes, it takes a while to get it out of your vocabulary. I will tell you, my husband and I spent 3 years getting guys out of our vocabulary. But once you do it, you can do it. It's almost like we can change language anytime we want. It is, literally to the point with me that when I hear a woman refer to herself as a female, I know 100% that she has worked in a misogynistic, woman-hating organization, unfortunately. All right, so one of the things I'm concerned about with Kamala is what's called the glass cliff. Ijeoma Oluo talks about this in her book Mediocre, one of the books that I read for Devotions with Daniella this week, which is exceptionally good. I'm going to read just the definition. It's called the glass cliff, and it's a phrase that was first coined in 2005 by University of Exeter researchers Michelle K. Ryan and S. Alexander Haslam. Their research was inspired by an article in the Times of London, not New York, that suggested women leaders have a negative impact on stock performance. Perhaps Ryan and Haslam smelled the whiff of bullshit coming from the page. They wondered if it was actually true that women brought doom and gloom to the businesses they led, or if there was some other reason why women were likely to be found in leadership positions at troubled businesses. They found that women were indeed more likely than men to be in leadership positions at distressed companies, but they also found that the problems were not the women's fault. In researching the 100 companies listed on the London Stock Exchange that the Time had reviewed for its article, they found that although women were vastly underrepresented on the boards overall, they were most likely to be added to the boards of companies that were in serious trouble. These firms had shown months of decline and seemed at risk of failure prior to adding women to their boards. When you can't keep women out anymore and you can't force them all to become secretaries or teachers because modern social politics demand that you at least pretend to support gender equality in the workplace, what you can do to keep women out of powerful positions in business, you can set them up to fail, or to be more accurate, you set them up to fall. Reason I got out of the Army with the glass clip. Check out Mediocre, The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America by Jomo Luo. This was written, I believe, in 2020, but it is so freaking relevant. So somebody on my comments asked what I say instead of guys. I say y'all. Well, I say two things. I say folks and I say y'all. I think those are the best gender neutral terms. Although there was one time, all right, so this was early in my speaking career, and I was giving a talk to military spouses about basically being the lead actress in the movie of your own life. And I'd planned it all out, my 20 minutes exactly, and I had practice, and I was saying, ladies. So I get to the talk, and there is a dude, Paul, his huge beard, big muscles and tattoos, sitting in the front row. And I was like, oh my God, can I change it? And I realized like I couldn't change it. I was prepared to do it with ladies. So I kindly announced to the group that when I say ladies, I am being gender inclusive. We all know what I mean. And then I said to Paul, please afterwards come and tell me how it felt to sit right there and have your presence absolutely erased from the room. This is so interesting. As a woman in the Army, I was often the only woman in the room, or the only woman on the sand. I tell that story in Uncultured. And people would say, guys, no problem. But anytime I am in a group of women and there is one man, they will say, welcome, ladies. Oh, sorry, and gentlemen, sir. Yeah. Language. It matters. There are studies that show that countries that have male default language, calling everyone guys, exceptionally languages like Latin American languages and Japanese, are the most sexist countries because language matters. And you can find stories about that in an amazing book called Invisible Women. Now, one thing I have to say about Kamala is this. People from the left are, how can you support this? She's in the same regime. She's in the whatever. As somebody twice to Afghanistan, who's a woman who came up through the male violence warfaring career, I can promise you that having a woman in that seat will make all of the difference. All of it. And by the way, I firmly believe that women are going to prove to be better at everything, especially including war. Because the thing is, we know the male way of doing everything. See, that's the correct way to use male. We know the male way of doing everything. We have to. We've had it shoved down our throat for all of our existence. They, however, do not know the female way of doing everything. So, for example, when I was on one of the first ground combat teams, that was doing deliberate operations with women attached, I knew the female way of doing war, and they did not, which is why I noticed something that they didn't. That kept us all alive. Check out Uncultured. You can get autographed copies from me in the description or in my bio. And then the last thing I want to talk about on the Kamala front is, other than that I love that her stepchildren call her Mamala, is misogynoir and digital blackface. These are two things that I learned about in the past 5 years with my deconstruction from white supremacy. And by the way, check out my podcast, Hey White Women, where I've partnered with the White Woman Whisperer, a Black creator, to deconstruct white supremacy like the cult that it is. And I will link our latest episode to this video. It's called Oops, Married a White Supremacist. Accidentally. That was me. I did a whole project about that called Un-American, because right after I wrote Uncultured, the Army contacted me and asked me to testify against an ex-husband that I hadn't seen or heard of in a decade so they could kick him out of the military for violent white supremacy. His name is William Jeffrey Poole, and you can Google him. It was a whole Reddit thing. Okay, so anyways, on Twitter a few years ago, somebody introduced me to the term misogynoir. And it was interesting at first, like I didn't know if that was a typo. And so I asked more and I got educated. Misogynoir is specifically misogyny against Black women, right? We all experience misogyny if we show up in female bodies. The correct way to use female. However, I don't experience misogynoir, right? There's a very different amount of misogyny that Black women experience in America specifically. So misogynoir, this is a very good thing for us to all get educated on because it's going to come up. Okay. And then the next thing is digital blackface. And when I tell you I got death threats on Twitter for talking about this to other white people, oh my goodness, y'all. Like, when are we going to stop being the bad guys? So digital blackface is, well, I'll use my own example. I shared a meme of Kamala Harris 4 years ago saying, I'm speaking, and somebody called me in and educated me on digital blackface. And the best way they explained it to me was it's not okay to use Black sassiness and attitude, especially from a white woman of a Black woman, when you don't have to live in the world and walk around all the time as a Black woman, right? So just Google it, read it. I've made some videos on it. It's like the easiest thing to do. Just like when you find out a word is harmful to a certain demographic, like women soldiers don't like being called female. It's the easiest thing to do is to just not do it and just teach yourself to not do it. I have not used a GIF of a Black person in 4 years because I know now that it's harmful. So please go check out digital blackface. It is really something you have to educate yourself on because there are nuances there and it's about how you are using it, right? So my husband right now is wearing a t-shirt that is Rosie the Riveter and it says, yes, we can. And it's Kamala Harris. That is not digital blackface because you are not putting on the attitude of a Black person, right? So there are some very fine nuances here, but it's really important to educate yourself on. And again, we're going to be seeing it a lot. I would hate for any of you to accidentally do it. And I would love for all of you to be able to educate your other white friends on it. And just be prepared for people to get extraordinarily angry at you. And then maybe ask them why they're so angry. There's another reason that I think that Kamala will do better in the Middle East than the men have done. There is a study, it is also talked about in this book. We heavily discussed it in my organizational psychology classes at Harvard, and the study is about risk. And the study is set up to test men and women's risk taking. And the hypothesis is that any individual adult should choose middle of the road risk, all else being equal. You're not going to choose the riskiest thing because it's risky, and you're not going to choose the safest thing because it's boring and doesn't get stuff done. So women across the board choose the middle of the road risk. Men with women choose the middle of the road risk. By themselves, choose the middle of the road risk. With other men, they choose the high risk every single time. And we were discussing this in my class, and people are like, think about families, think about business, think about all the effects this has. And I'm like, oh my God, y'all, think about war. Think about war. I've explained this to my husband so many times because my husband, who is such a radicalized feminist and is amazing, but he comes from a world where if someone disrespects you, you punch them in the face. And I have walked him through so many times, I am not from that world. There is nothing that you can say to me with words to make me violently emote toward you. That is learned behavior. And trust and believe me when I say I was at the tactical level of the Forever War, and the only response is not killing people. That's never the only response. But when multiple men are in charge, especially with American culture in the background, that's usually the only response. So I'm gonna wait my rant there. Take a breath. Just kidding. I'm back to talk about Kamala because I also want to say this, that a lot of people are like, well, I don't know. I'm not sure. How much change is she going to be? She's one person. She is not going to solve everything. And when you are the person to break the glass ceiling, first of all, it's incredibly significant. There's tons of research that shows that once you break the glass ceiling, it all comes tumbling down. But you also can't change everything. The first person to break the glass ceiling has to play the game a lot of times. There's actually research that shows that you have to have 3 women on a board in order to get the benefit of one woman's point of view. Because if you only have one woman, she has to play the boys' game. If you have 2 women, they are pitted against each other by guess who? Oh, the boys. Only when you have 3 women are they able to each be their own unique self. This applies for minorities and many other types of things. So, I was asked about this a lot when the first woman to become a 4-star general in the infantry was appointed, and everyone's like, "How do you feel about this?" And I'm like, of course, it is a huge step forward for women. Abso-freaking-lutely. However, this woman has been playing the man's game for 30 years. I don't even think she has a normal woman's perspective anymore. And this is what is interesting too when we talk about the female thing, and all of these active duty army women will show up to say, well, I'm called female and I use the word female and it's fine for me. And oh, honey, like we know because we've been there, but it's impossible to be successful in a misogynistic organization without internalizing a lot of that misogyny. Trust me, I was number one, pick me girl, thought that playing the game and being better than 99% of the other women was going to change their minds about women. It doesn't. It just proves to them that the rest of the women can't do it in their opinion. And I cannot even tell you how many times I heard the phrase, oh, women can't do this. I mean, Captain Mestyanek, but she's not really a woman. So, um, all that to say, no, we do not need to be putting the burden of fixing the entire patriarchy and industrial war machine on the first woman to get the job. Like, talk about glass cliffs. And now the real last thing I want to say on this topic is that polls are showing that 47% of women are still voting for Donald Trump. And you best believe that it is much higher if you just look at white women. What are we doing? We cannot be on the wrong side of history again. Let's get it together. I do secretly think that so many Republican women are not going to be able to resist the pull of seeing a woman president in their lifetime, that they are going to break rank. Of course, we have also had Roe v. Wade overturned. Check out my uterus necklace. It's with garnet, a red stone, because periods. It also happens to be a stone that's very important to me personally as a woman. So it's amazing. Just got that from a fan. I think that no country on earth has ever given back rights without a fight, and we're going to see that. I think that the young people that nobody has ever polled correctly. I said last year when I was quoted in The Atlantic talking about the cult of MAGA that they're on TikTok talking to me. They're also writing deconstruction music saying, you told me all my friends were going to HE double hockey sticks, so I'm going with them. I think the white Christian male Republicans are not going to know what hit them. Of course, I still expect at least 20% of women to play the misogyny patriarchy game. But I'm hoping that it's really, really, really going to change a lot. I think it's going to be amazing. I was actually looking for a way to say this, and then I saw a Black creator, I think she calls herself Professor Crunk on Threads, said it, and it is this, it's going to be hard for white women to accept that the first woman president is not going to be a white woman, because consciously or subconsciously, we definitely have all expected that. And I hope we can just get out of the way and let this amazing woman lead. And again, the white women for Kamala Harris call last night was the largest call in Zoom history. So there are some signs that maybe a lot of us white women are going to be on the right side of history. Okay, so this week we recorded only one podcast episode, which was on cults and culting of America, because we had to pause on, or we just couldn't all get together for the Hey White Women podcast. I'm also going to be gallivanting about Portugal with my family for the next 2 weeks. So there will be pauses on the Hey White Woman podcast. On the Cults and Culting of America podcast, we have enough episodes to keep you going. So please stay with us. This week, I recorded an episode all about distinguishable vernacular. So we're going through my 10 parts of a cult list. We're doing one episode on each to really like deep dive in before we start bringing on guests to talk about their cults, like Nexium or being a teacher in America. We're going to get all dishy and fun with it. Um, one of the things that was really important to me about distinguishable vernacular that I have been thinking and talking about all week is unlearning it when we leave the cults. I'm going to read. This is a little bit from my very not finished chapter on distinguishable vernacular. Jargon Jungle, Navigating the Language of Loyalty. Imagine scrolling through Instagram and coming across someone with a massive following. Her posts are filled with jargon like clean eating, detox, self-care rituals, superfoods, mindfulness, and holistic wellness. These terms create an exclusive community of followers who adopt this language as part of their identity. Phrases like nourish your soul and align your chakras and toxin-free lifestyle become part of their daily lexicon, adding to the allure and mystique of the influencer's message. This use of a distinguishable vernacular not only draws in followers, but also maintains their engagement by creating a sense of belonging and understanding that outsiders lack. The specialized language serves as a badge of honor, signaling that they are part of a select group that gets it. Followers feel connected through this shared terminology, which sets them apart from those who don't understand or use these words. The sense of exclusivity is heightened by the use of hashtags like hashtag wellness warrior, hashtag clean living, and hashtag healthy mindset, further creating a tight-knit community. In addition to the health and wellness jargon, there's a growing trend known as conspirituality, blending conspiracy theories with spirituality. Terms like awakened, truth seeker, 5D consciousness, and deep state detox start to appear in these communities. This merging of wellness and conspiracy rhetoric can draw in followers who are looking for both health advice and a deeper, often controversial, understanding of the world. The influencer subtly incorporates these ideas into their content, creating an even more devoted following. By tapping into the anxieties and desires of their audiences, these influencers manage to create a powerful and captivating online presence, all while promoting health and wellness. Distinguishable vernacular is a powerful tool used by high control groups to create a sense of identity and exclusivity. By developing a unique language, these groups reinforce their ideology and create barriers to understanding for outsiders. So, distinguishable vernacular actually helps increase isolation, which was the step right before. This tactic is not limited to cults, but is also prevalent in corporate environments, social movements, and other organizations. Amanda Montell, author of Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism, emphasizes that language is the ultimate tool for making and breaking human relationships, and cults are very, very good at weaponizing language. Love the book Cultish. She does platform cult apologists on the topic of brainwashing. Brainwashing does exist, and you would be hard pressed to find a educated cult professional who would agree with that part of Uncultured put forward that brainwashing doesn't exist. The rest of the book is phenomenal. She looks at the way cults use language and then the way that other groups around us that are not cults, not called cults, use language. I am kind of doing that, but the whole book, right? So I have one chapter on language, but I am doing these 10 parts of group behavior, how cults use them, how the military uses them, and then how all these other groups around us use them. One of the, people always say like, well, every line of work has like its own words. Yes, that's true. That's totally normal. My sort of distinguishment for distinguishable vernacular is If you can drop a stranger into an operations meeting in that organization and they need a translator, you have a distinguishable vernacular. That is where Children of God is. That is also where the US Army is. One of the things that is really important and is often overlooked as part of deconstructing afterwards and taking off that cult pseudo personality, as it's called, is learning to stop using the cult words. One of the things I'm sure the vet bros hate about my book Uncultured, one of the things that I did that I think makes it ultimately readable by anyone is I used no acronyms. None at all. I just spelt out First Lieutenant Daniella Mestyanek every single time. And guess what? It's too easy. That's a very loaded phrase for those that don't know. It's really, really important to stop using the language that the cult gave you for things for two reasons. One, you need people outside the cult to understand you. And two, a lot of times the words that the cult gave you were for whitewashing. There's this other thing also about PTSD, that the way that we push ourselves and other people through traumatic situations is by telling ourselves it's not so bad. Trust and believe that when I was in basic training, every time they smoked us, do tons of push-ups, exercises make you cause violence and pain to yourself to help you disassociate so they can then use your body as a war machine. Every time they did that, I would jump up afterwards and loudly say to myself and anyone around me, oh, that wasn't so bad. And people hated me for it. But what I was doing was trying to just help the brainwashing not go all the way deep. One of the problems, though, is when we get out of those situations, when we get out of those cults, when we get out of the military, when we get out of those traumatic situations, we don't stop and tell our bodies and our psyches, it's over, and it really was that bad. That's a really important part of deconstruction. One of the reasons why most veterans don't have nearly the amount of disability money, which is, by the way, a workers' comp claim filed with the government, and they have already figured out the minimum that they have to pay you for breaking your body, spirit, and soul. And veterans won't go get it. My late brother being one of them, because they tell themselves, oh, it wasn't so bad. My trauma wasn't so bad. Please go get your disability. One of the reasons that other cult scholars, none of whom have military experience, like to argue with me about the military not really being a cult is because they say it gives benefits afterwards, to which I agree. Yes, the US military is the cult that I know of that pays their ex-members the best benefits. I completely agree with that. Nothing else doesn't make it a cult. Also, by the way, this is also one of the reason why the team building that many of you all may have been part of, where they bring in two special forces dudes and they have you do a Tough Mudder or go patrol through the woods or something so that you can build like a military team. Well, we know from many, many studies that this kind of deep camaraderie, which I believe is not healthy, it's an enmeshed kind of community independence, is created by going through really, really hard things together. Example of this right now is, how do you get to be Cam on the Taylor Swift Eras tour, right? The man who literally holds her limp body and moves her hands for her in the show. Like, you get to that position by being in the trenches together and doing really, really hard things together. And once the Eras tour is over, nobody that ever comes to work for her ever again is going to be able to be in that circle all the way of the people who did the Eras tour. Just like there is a very big divide for us between people who deployed to war during the 20 Years' War and people who were in the military but did not deploy to war. Like, they're just never going to get it. But remember this, doing really hard things together is what bonds people. Going through trauma together is what bonds people. And part of why it's almost impossible to reproduce in organizational settings is because it's not ethical to put people through really, really hard things on purpose. Okay. Also, this week, we need to talk about people waking up from their cults, specifically the cult of MAGA. I'm far from the only person, cult scholar or author, that is saying this. Um, I believe what we are seeing right now is the emperor has no clothes, right? Kamala Harris is the first person actually acting like she is running against Donald Trump with as much ridiculousness as there is to that statement. And the thing is, as we know from the allegory, it only takes one person to tell the emperor that he has no clothes on for the entire jig to be up for everybody, whether they want it to be up or not. And I believe we're seeing that. I believe we're going to be seeing a lot of people waking up. And there's an author named Tia Levings. She has a book coming out August 6th that's called A Well-Trained Wife. It's so, 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 so good. I can't say enough. It's also on audio. If you listen to Uncultured on audio, she had the same director as I did for Uncultured, who was an amazing director. But she has been talking about this also. Please go check her out on Instagram, take a look at her book, pre-order it. But she's talking about how, like, we have to be able to receive people. And I really like to reemphasize this. One of the biggest exit costs are the entrance costs, are having to go back to your friends, to your family, to your community from before the cult and admit that you were wrong. This is an incredibly hard thing to do. And in fact, the term cognitive dissonance comes from research into this. I talked about it extensively on my last roll up, but suffice it to say, when the cult leader is proven to be wrong, like the apocalypse did not happen, a lot of cult members double down harder. And these are the cult members who have burned all of their bridges, who have thrown everything in with the cult. I call these the Rudy Giulianis. You know how he's never going to be known again as America's mayor. He is going to go down as the old man in front of Four Seasons Total Landscaping with dye running down his face. So he has to go down with the shrimp, with the ship and the shrimp. This is my grandfather who still runs the money for the Children of God. Like, he's never going to wake up. It would destroy him, I believe. Um, and also I want to read in here. I'll have to do the questions afterward, but I did have somebody reach out and ask me about, what do we do for our friends and our family members that are in cults? And the unfortunate answer, the only answer that cult informed people have to give, whether they are scholars, survivors, police, etc., is keep channels of communication open and hope that when they wake up, they reach out to you. Because it is almost impossible to force a crack in somebody's brainwashing. In my professional opinion, one of the things I am adding to the cult scholarship is because I think we buy into our own indoctrination. So, for example, there was nothing they could do to me in the Children of God to make me believe. And trust me when I say they tried. And exorcisms are no fun. But as soon as I decided to join the army, I was the one shutting down my own doubts with the great thought stopping cliche, Daniella, you signed up for this, right? We buy into our own indoctrination. That being said, I am consulting on a very cool indie film out of Australia right now called Holy Water. And I describe it as 12 Angry Men meets Uncultured. It is so meticulously researched by the man who wrote it. And the concept is basically, what if you have to force the crack in the brainwashing? Like, for example, the cult member has a bomb strapped to their chest. And it goes through that. And I think it's going to be so, 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 so good. It was actually like, I felt bad taking money for the script because I had so few comments about it because it was incredibly well done. So there is a link in my link tree for the Kickstarter. What's the other one? GoFundMe. To hopefully raise 10 grand to get this movie made because again, it's an indie film. If you happen to be interested, check it out. They do say that the one story that Hollywood cannot tell is a cult story, because if they do it right, you don't get it because you're in the cult. Just on the note of the Rudy Giulianis and the people that will continue supporting no matter what, there are still people who support Keith Raniere of Nexium, even after he got 120 years in jail. Again, I want to remind everyone that Hobby Lobby are still the bad guys. They took out a whole page ad and something, I didn't write it down, saying that America's leaders should only be Christians. So please just like spend your craft money anywhere else. Anywhere else. By the way, I have a giant cache of yarn and craft supplies just by going to thrift stores and getting whatever strikes my fancy for $3 instead of 40, for 3 balls of yarn or whatever. So I really recommend that for people. Also, just for fun, I recently found out that the reason Hobby Lobby doesn't use barcodes and suffers from hundreds of thousands of dollars in loss every year is because they are afraid of the mark of the beast. And that just gives me so much glee. I just have to talk about it. Okay, another thing I talked about this week, or that I spent time on this week, was cults and disembodiment. So we all know that disassociation, maybe we don't all know. I found out that I was disassociating all the time when I wrote my book, and readers were like, "You describe disassociation so well." And I was like, "Oh, that's what it is." But there's something even more. Cults want you not just disassociated, actually disembodied. So we have to remember that cults are always about labor. I hope I say this on every single sit rep. And they want your body, functioning as much as possible and your mind functioning not at all, so that they can use you like a puppet. Okay. A big part of this is disembodiment. And it didn't really hit me until I've just written a 37-page chapter about self sacrifice and the way that cults want us to separate from our body. And getting you to separate from your identity and your body is not just like nice part of a cult or something we often see. It is the most crucial thing for them to get you. This is a little bit that I've written about it. One big way that cults get people to self-sacrifice, often without them even realizing it, is by encouraging them to suppress their individuality and focus on what's good for the group. In the army, we call it needs of the army, whenever we need to prioritize the group over personal desires. The aim is to erase personal identities, giving the cult a blank slate to mold, because they break you down and then build you back up. We always forget about that part. As Margaret Singer, not Margaret Sanger, white feminist of birth control, Margaret Singer of cults, a top expert on cults, says, in a cult, the individual is subjected to relentless indoctrination aimed at erasing their identity and replacing it with that of the group. This isn't just a side goal for cults, it's central to their operation. Robert Lifton, another major figure in cult studies, puts it simply: the essence of a cult is the suppression of individual autonomy in favor of blind obedience to a charismatic leader or ideology. And this is part of why it is so, so, so important to deconstruct when you leave a cult, because you literally have to pull off that pseudo personality, that cult personality, the person the cult made you be, and figure out who you are now. If you were born and raised in a cult or went into a cult before the age of 25 when you were still forming, your personality is probably permanently changed. And also, you probably didn't get to form a personality in the first place for those of us born in cults. So, the good news is, I think once you consciously understand that, at least for me, once I consciously realized and was able to say in a sentence, "Oh, I never got to form a personal identity," I was like, cool. Now I get to go figure out who I want to be. And by the way, I always recommend wear some wacky outfits, go out in public in something absolutely unreasonable, because it will remind you that you're the adult of your own life and you can make that decision. And since we are talking about unreasonable clothes, I am now going to show you the wackiest thing I have ever crocheted. I'm probably going to stand up on this wobbly chair. So I took this romper, jumper. Which one are the pants? And I cut off the pant legs, and it's the bad soldier thing to be doing. And I made them into crazy yarn lady bell bottoms. And it's not even over, because the legs that I cut off, I am turning into cardigan with yarn arms, the same. This is my crazy yarn lady outfit. My daughter calls me the crazy yarn lady and introduces me to people as such. And sometimes when I get called a name, I like to think what that would look like as an outfit. I'm also working on an amazing fringe coat because somebody once called me a fringe expert in a meeting, and I was like, oh, I like that. Anyway. Oh yes, we're still talking about disembodiment. One of the things that we have to do is learn to be in our bodies again. And that is really, really, really difficult, especially when you've been taught that it's just so easy to not be in your body. It's a really important part of healing. I believe it's a really important part of experiencing joy and happiness on the other side of a cult. It's just really, really, really important. And by the way, I kind of had this big realization when I was talking to someone from a yoga cult who was telling me about how her guru like really, really emphasized the leaving your body part. I was like, this is important. That author was Joel Tamraz of The Secret Practice, which we just did last month in Cult Book Club. Oh yeah, today I'll have a little portion on the end of this video where I give you the recap. But I'm talking to a group of therapists about the need for more. Well, it's really about mental health and social media, not how social media affects mental health, but how mental health professionals can actually use social media to reach people. And of course, the dangers of social media. So I'm talking to them, one, about how I use social media, but also like how there is this huge gap in the mental health field. This is Style. He's the grumpiest toy poodle you've ever seen in your life. But how a lot of us are using social media to kind of stand in the gap, right? And when I was in graduate school, one of the first classes we talked about the scientist practitioner gap. The way I explain this is like we have all of this research on leadership and groups and culture, but what happens in actual organizations is whatever Simon Sinek says, not the research, right? Simon Sinek, just a writer. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go live in that gap because not everyone is going to read the research studies. We take a whole semester to learn how to read research studies. But I can do that, and then I can come out here and be the pop organizational psychologist that all of the PhD academics look down their nose at. However, I write the books that get read and get the ideas there. And we cult professionals have definitely found that there is a huge gap in mental health treatment, being that, we've had sociologists and psychologists both say that they believe it is impossible to heal from cult damage, cult trauma, coercive groups without understanding how they work. But it is quite rare to find a therapist who understands such. And so it's very common for cult survivors to be misdiagnosed with personality disorders like bipolar, schizophrenia, dissociative identity disorder, when really what they need to do is deconstruct the coercive control and understand it. So I actually have like a consulting practice where I'm not a psychologist, I'm an organizational psychologist, and everyone that I work with has to have their own therapist. But as they're going through therapy, I can help them understand coercive groups. I sometimes actually think that maybe I'll take the rest of my GI Bill and go become a therapist that actually knows about cults. We'll see. I have a bunch of books to finish writing first. Yeah, so it's a big hole. It's something like we really, really need people to go get like educated on, but it's also, all the educated people in the world can look down their nose at what creators like me and others do on TikTok and other forms of social media, but it's happening. There are people out there that need healing. They need to understand, and we're out here standing in the gap. And I think my community is really, really helped by all of the therapists and researchers that or mental health professionals that come into my comments and my videos and like educate me, educate others, add to what I'm saying. So like this is a mutually beneficial thing. So that is most of my notes. I'm going to go through the books that I was reading this week. So I showed you Mediocre, Dangerous Legacy of White Male America. I can't say enough good things about this. In Cult Book Club, we are reading Pure by Linda K. Klein, which is a deconstruction of purity culture, evangelical, Christian, sexual purity, to be specific. But one of the things I pointed out to my book club, and of course I'm going to read you something about it, is that purity, all cults use purity requirements, not always sexual purity, right? A purity requirement is any black and white thing that you do or don't do. I don't put this in my body. I don't put this in my soul. I don't put this in my hair. Yes, I was in the curly girl hair cult for a while. Let me find a little part because it explains it. Okay. Cults and controlling groups often have purity requirements that strip away your personal identity. These rules cover everything: diet, sexual behavior, personal habits, and even your thoughts. These following them shows you're obedient and totally committed to the group. By sticking to these strict rules, you set yourself apart from outsiders and prove your loyalty. Plus, it makes it easier for leaders to spot and punish anyone who steps out of line, keeping everyone in check and isolated from outside influences. This constant monitoring keeps everyone on edge and ensures the group's power over your life. These rules are often presented as essential for spiritual enlightenment or achieving a higher state of being. Cult leaders convince members that these rules are divinely ordained, justifying extreme measures and maintaining control. And I like to point out here that no alcohol and no drugs are purity requirements. I'm not saying they're good or bad. I'm just pointing out that they are purity requirements. And no coffee, Mormons looking at you. Strict purity requires a lot of time and mental energy to follow, keeping members busy and less likely to question the group's beliefs. Cults often promote the idea that their path to purity is the one true one, creating a sense of moral superiority and an us versus them mentality, which is the step that comes right after distinguishable vernacular. This makes members more committed and resistant to outside influences. It also reinforces discipline and self-control, which are highly valued within the group. Finally, it turns members into their own jailers, engaged in constant self-surveillance and often the surveillance of fellow members. This is intentional because it helps break them down. And in fact, constant surveillance helps break down a lot. Pause here for a little anecdote. I was watching a magic movie and there was a legilimens, someone who can read minds. And when she is on the side of the good guys, she has like a nothing job that is not important at all. As soon as she goes over to the bad guys, she is like right next to the leader, working very closely. And this is because there is no legitimate good reason for constant invasion of privacy. It only benefits the bad guys. Same for the guy in Kanto who can turn into other people. That only helps you do bad things, not good things. So, something to think about. Also, something to think about as a former government trained intelligence officer. I can tell you that we have all given up our privacy for iPhones. Privacy no longer exists. Okay. Surveillance. Research has found that self-concealment can have negative physical and psychological effects, including anxiety and depression. And always, purity is about controlling other people. In her book, Pure, Deconstructing Evangelical Purity Culture, Linda K. Klein tells us the purity message is not about sex. Rather, it is about us, who we are expected to be, and who it is said we will become if we fail to meet those expectations. Also true is that appearance controls, which I read about extensively here, are never about appearance. They're always about proscribing behavior. Purity requirements reinforce the exit costs you will pay if you cannot sacrifice yourself constantly enough to meet them. Purity requirements work because it's hard for humans to be perfect. They can induce guilt and shame, making members feel unworthy if they fail to meet the standards. And guilt and shame are huge weapons of cults. This emotional manipulation increases members' dependence on the group for validation and a sense of self-worth. It also leads members to self-police and monitor each other, creating an environment of constant surveillance. Interestingly, the cult leader is almost never subject to these purity requirements, expecting followers to adhere to them religiously while they remain exempt. In today's corporate America, the idea of professionalism often gets used to uphold white supremacy as a purity requirement. Tima Okun and Keith Jones, American grassroots organizer scholars, explain that these standards are heavily influenced by white supremacy culture, favoring whiteness and discriminating against non-Western and non-white professionalism standards in dress code. And I would like to overemphasize this for the US military. Everything about appearance control and standards to do your job in the US military is about being a 6'2" white, blue-eyed helicopter pilot named Tom Young. And if you are that person, he lives in my house, your career is pretty good. You can do 20 years at war and be pretty good. Every demographic you get away from being Tom Young, your career gets harder. And in 2014, the Army had to embarrassingly retract their appearance regulations because they were so blatantly anti-Black. And remember, appearance control is never about appearance. It is always about behavior. This scrutiny goes beyond appearance to include language, tone, and behavior, with Black people facing harsher consequences for perceived infractions than their white counterparts. By imposing narrow definitions of professionalism rooted in white cultural norms, corporate America perpetuates systemic inequalities and denies Black people the chance to express themselves authentically, making it harder for them to advance and succeed. By equating professionalism with adherence to dominant cultural standards, corporations reinforce existing power hierarchies and systemic inequalities, creating more barriers to inclusion and advancement for marginalized individuals. And it's definitely time for us to start recognizing that, like, anything that is trying to uphold the status quo is harmful, because the status quo in America is racist and sexist and capitalist and patriarchal and very, very, very racist. Cults often use appearance and attitude control as twin weapons to break down a person's sense of self. Appearance control is usually one of the first things you notice about cult members. Sometimes there's an obvious uniform, but other times it's more subtle. They just look different, yet similar to each other. Cults care a lot about how they appear to the outside world, maintaining an image that seems warm and loving, but the reality is often very different. They also control how their members look behind closed doors. And I'm going to take this opportunity to say that Mormonism is a cult. LDS, whatever you want to call it is a cult, and you will be very hard pressed to find a cult-educated professional working right now that disagrees with that. In my opinion, the only reason they still exist is because well-groomed white people and American racism. Okay, so we're reading the book Pure in Cult Book Club next month. I will be listening to it while I'm gallivanting around Portugal. But also at the same time, I love Serendipitous Epiphany. I found in my little book club Erotic? Yeah. Erotic revolutionaries, Black women, sexuality, and popular culture. And what's very, very interesting is the way that purity culture is used differently in two white girls and two Black girls. So looking at these both at the same time, because it's always great to have more perspective. Check these out. Also been reading through Amish myths that this one is very difficult. It's very difficult. Amish are, in my opinions, another one of the worst cults, and another one that we just accept because don't we just love that good baking? Check out Amish Misfit by Mary Byler. She's also a creator. She's pretty active on TikTok and I think on Instagram. But again, it's rough. But we don't have a lot of books by survivors of the Amish, and I think it has an important place. And then finally, we have this cool little magazine book from Arizona State University Office for Veteran and Military Academic Engagement. Ooh, I opened it up right to the first place. What we have there, Camp Followers by Daniella Mestyanek Young. They asked me to submit a piece that I have written, and so I took the piece out of my book that starts with the contractor guy explaining how to use armored vests if you're in the military. Oh, very specifically, if you're a man in the military, because they are made these giant plates where you have to have them less than half an inch away from your vital organs. Because if they are more than half an inch away from your vital organs, like they would be for any woman, the concussion can still cause internal bleeding and KIA you anyways. And if you're wondering if we went into combat untrained and with armor that wouldn't keep us alive, yes, we did. Fortunately, by the time I went back to Afghanistan a year and a half later, well, when I came back from being on one of the first women on those patrols, I was the women of the 101st that did this were part of the research and development for a women's vest. And by the time I went back to Afghanistan a year and a half later, I had a vest made for women. And of course, all you have to do is realize that boobs are not vital organs. So, much like armor that all of the fantasy people love, you push the boobs up and out of the way and you protect the vital organs. And the woman's sappy plate, Kevlar bulletproof plate, is only about yay big because that's what you need to protect. And also, every branch of the US military gives one free elective surgery to any soldier or any service member or their spouse. And this is in part so that they are good at reconstructing things like breasts should they get destroyed in war. And the US Army actually has very, very good plastic surgeons. You just can't sue. So I just pay my plastic surgeon. Okay, so it starts with that story. It's called Camp Followers. It starts with that story, and it ends with me researching and saying what other women think about women in the military, which is just like armies have always had camp followers as they go off to war. The US Army has blonde lieutenants. I'm just lucky my husband's a combat guy, so he doesn't have to work with any of those dangerous SLUTSs. Joke's on them. Yes, he did. But it ends with the most quoted line of Uncultured. Instagram will punish me for this. Don't get raped. Don't get raped. Don't get yourself raped. And this is one of the things that I say about my book is that I am incredibly proud of being one of the first women on these patrols. And you see it in scene in the book, me as the only woman with 25 American soldiers and 15 Afghan soldiers going out on patrol. You also see me being pulled aside and told to watch my back. This happened 3 times. There's only one time in the book. And not one of us stopped to think, why is it that we are afraid that 25 American soldiers are going to simultaneously lose their minds and rape an officer out on the objective. That is rape culture. That is what we live with in the military every single day. That is why Gen Z is not joining the military. And they've done it all to themselves. And I just cackle with glee to see the problems in their recruiting because no shit. Anyway, I have absolutely no idea how you get this magazine. I just got sent one. But check it out. You can read that chapter in Uncultured. The second half of Camp Followers is where I actually get to war. And that is its whole own thing. Okay, this was one of the comments I wanted to just read. It's not a question, but this was after I talked about my presentation to therapists. It says, the rough draft of the presentation sounds fabulous. I hope you can help some therapists realize their blind spots and start seeking some training on CPTSD, coercive control, and religious trauma so that they can become more competent to help more people. If only to function as an informal and accessible support group, social media is immensely valuable to those with any sort of trauma, but especially trauma from coercive control. Odds are any community we build on the outside doesn't understand, and we will probably limit how much we try to get them to understand because we don't want to scare them off. We need to hear from people who get it, if only to remind ourselves that we aren't crazy and we weren't imagining it. This is a really, really, really important piece. You need someone else who gets it to agree with you that it really was that bad. I think it's also important to point out that sometimes stories on social media can give us language we didn't have from people further into deconstruction or from slightly different backgrounds so that we can start going down the right research rabbit holes and having the right conversations to figure out what we actually need to heal. And I mean, that's part of why I wrote a book, right? Because reading other people's memoirs were so important for me, for giving me the context and the language so that I could even think about my story and how it needed to be deconstructed. And I certainly put some phrases like, we grew up in a religious prison camp, to give to other people so that they could have language and context to actually describe what was going on. And then, well, I'm going to have to read some more questions at the end. Oh, the main question that I wanted to address on this roll up was somebody asking me, hey, I want to be a cult whistleblower. What can I do? And the answer is unfortunately, mostly probably nothing. There is no process in this country for whistleblowing on cults. There is no acknowledgement in our legal system whatsoever of coercive control. This is why we see the Ballerina Farms lady in an absolute complete cult in a horribly dangerous situation. And all of these Americans are saying, so what? She picked it. She's doing it. She's an adult. And like, Americans really don't have the context to understand how someone can be walking around on their own, seeming like a completely normal adult, and still be under complete coercive control. And this is very frustrating. And this has been going on for decades and decades and decades. And in fact, part of the cult wars in the 70s and 80s, yes, that's real, go check it out, was because religious scholars fought so hard against any kind of legislation that would protect people and children in cults. In fact, it is the reason why the children of God were in 4 different countries given back to the pedo cult. And very, very specifically, a terrible human being who I hope will burn in HE double hockey sticks, even though I don't believe it exists, is named Gordon Melton. And he is the man who came up with the term New Religious Movement. He is also the man that was given $100,000 from the Children of God pedophile cult to say they were in a cult. And then 4 countries gave us back. And he is still credited and highly respected in this fucking field. And fucking religious scholars need to stay the fuck out of cults. They're not the same thing. Get out of here. And now, for 5 minutes about knitting. I already showed you the pants that I'm wearing. And This little video is going to show you the rest of the things that I finished. But right now, I am making a scarf again. This is my signature thing that I invented, which is where I take a scarf and I turn it into a cardigan. And I've added these puffy sleeves that are kind of my signature. I spent years and years and years thinking about what I could do because I'm allergic to the sun, but also cardigans are stupid and boring, but also I have tons of scarves because I travel the world allergic to the sun. And I came up with the scarf again, and I love it. It's most of what I wear now. And also want to remind everybody that knitting and crocheting, not to mention any kind of creating, is a wonderful, wonderful way to heal trauma. But knitting, very, very specifically, because it uses both sides of the brain, has some really, really amazing healing capabilities. And there's one other benefit is that the circle of people who hate knitting, the Venn diagram of people who hate knitting and misogynists is 100% a circle. So just by knitting all the time, you can really get rid of a lot of women haters in your life. And I love that so much. And by the way, Tom Daly is back at the Olympics, knitting away. Love him so much too. Thank you all for being a part of my weekly sit rep, and I will see you next week. Check out my knitting. Okay, so for today's Knitting Cult Lady show and tell, I'm going to show you the craziest thing I have crocheted so far. So this was a jumpsuit, like a long one, and it had these slits up the front, and I was not 14 and didn't want to wear that. And so I cut them off, and then I've done these crazy lace bell bottoms to go with it. And I think they're pretty cool. I, of course, will wear it with maroon leggings underneath, but other people could wear it as like, you would see the legs through it. But then, that is not all. With the legs, I'm going to make a top, like a scarf again. That's gonna have the same sort of bell-bottomy sleeves, and it's gonna be so amazing. It's my crazy yarn lady outfit. Sometimes when I get called a name, I think of what that outfit would look like. And here are a couple of other things that I have finished this week. So this is a scarf again that I made for my friend Felicia, who also grew up with me, not with me, but in the Children of God like me. And I was talking about beaches and how I'd just been to Costa Rica, and she was telling me like, oh, I can't do beaches. Like she experienced most of her abuse and growing up in the cult and being trafficked, etc. in Costa Rica. And apparently I said, I don't remember this, but apparently I said to her like, oh, Felicia, don't let them take the beaches, or don't let them have the beaches or something. Anyways, so last time I saw her when I was in New York City, she gave me this scarf, which is like a beach sarong, right? And I made her a Don't Let Them Have the Beaches scarf again. Okay, and then I have one of my very popular Knitorious RBG sweaters that you see me knitting in a lot of my videos. It's got these huge bell sleeves, like a judge, and this, oh, it just stands out so much. Literally every time I make a video of one of these, I sell another one. So maybe the next one is yours. And to go with it, some love bomb earrings. Ah, look how adorable that's gonna be. Anyway, hoped you liked seeing all of the knitting stuff that I completed this week. So about ballerina farms and the trad wife lady who is all in the news right now. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go look it up. But I just want to be like as clear as I can possibly be about this. As a survivor of one of the world's worst cults, the Children of God, and as a cult educated professional who works in this field, Mormons are in a cult. Mormonism is a cult. LDS, whatever they want to call themselves, it is a cult. And you would be hard pressed to find another cult educated professional working in the field that doesn't agree. We're all working on this and getting this messaging out. And so are all of the MLMs, multi-level marketing schemes, that are heavily, heavily led by Mormons. There's a reason for that. So she is definitely in a cult. And this concept that, like, she's making her own decisions, she's 18. The US has no protections against cults, against coercive control. It's really, really frustrating. What do you mean? How could they have protections? Well, in Japan, for example, after their little waltz with cults, they put in laws protecting children. In Japan, it is illegal to force a child to be in a religion, and they call it a soul crime, which I love. You can't force them to go to church. You can't force them to be religious. They have other laws too. I just don't know what they are. But there could be plenty of laws. We could have freedom from religion laws in the US, not just freedom of religion, and we could have laws against coercive control. But right now, there's nothing you can do. We saw this on the Twin Flames video, right? We saw this on the TikTok dance cult video. We see this, if you don't know, the neighbors on both sides of my townhouse and one across the way are a religious cult. And we watch them recruit from the University of Maryland all of the time. And we have talked to police and we have talked to FBI. And I have literally told them who I am as we sit right here. There is nothing we can do. But the concept that she is making free decisions is not true. And this is one of those things that I think people really don't understand unless they have been in a cult and fully, fully, fully deconstructed their cult membership. So, of course, the average American citizen out there who has not fully deconstructed the cult of America is not going to see it, right? We don't have any context for a human being walking around seemingly normal, speaking normally, doing adult things, and not being under their own control. And that is because, by the way, religious leaders and cult leaders and people who want power in this country have worked very, 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 very hard to make sure that the general public doesn't know about it. And if you don't believe me, just go have a Google about the cult wars. Yeah, where religious scholars actually got people to believe that you should never listen to cult survivors about their experience because they're all disgruntled. Which I always love this argument because nobody ever says, why the F are they so disgruntled, right? But yeah, she is in a cult. She has been since birth. Her husband seems like a terrible, terrible human being, which, most straight white men who accept having house slaves are. Drives me so crazy. Oh, and by the way, I'm just going to throw in this little nugget that there are several studies that show that having more than 5 children results in diminishing returns for the children. Interestingly enough, when my mother had 5 children, my sister and I took her aside and begged her to please stop having children. She now has 8 children. And there are studies that show this. And why do they show this? Well, we know based on the study of groups, I'm an organizational psychologist background, we know that human beings can only be very close, best friend close, spouse close to 5 people. That is the most you can maintain close relationships with. So guess what? If you have a spouse and 4 kids, those are your people. When you add a 5th child, everyone is going to start experiencing diminishing returns in that relationship. Now think of the people that have 10 children. My father has 16 children. I'm from a cult family of 24 siblings. You cannot do it without parentification. You cannot have 5 children or more without having to rely on the eldest children to help you raise the youngest children, which harms them. It puts them, for example, into precocious maturity, because precocious maturity comes from growing up out of order. And you know who looks for young people, especially young women with precocious maturity? Predators. That's right. Men exactly like that husband that we read about in Ballerina Farms. They're the ones that look for the 16-year-olds, the 17-year-olds, the 19-year-olds that are so mature for their age. because they were parentified or they were put through extreme trauma, and they are going to be able to manipulate them, and they know that. That article is a national tragedy. And I can't believe nobody's even talking about the Mormon cult that she is in. Oh, and last thing I have to say is that cult scholars have worked very, very hard to get small out of the definition of cult. Size does not matter. You can have 12 million people cults, Mormons. Oh, and by the way, if you needed to dislike them more, they have more money than the Catholic Church, even. Because, they force all their members to buy sacred underwear, magic underwear, Jesus jammies, and they have to buy them from the church. When I found that out, I mean, I could not explain to you how on the ground my jaw was. Like, it is so disgusting and corrupt. I cannot even begin. Most desperately want, because the reason that these cults survived and ruined our childhoods is because Americans do not know about cults. Please stop saying this. It's terrible, and it is re-victimizing people. We grew up in cults. We get to talk about them as effing much as we want to.